Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Just to let you know, we do have an Instagram now. It's called Book Life Reads, so don't forget to go check it out. And it'll have the books that we've previously read and the upcoming books and maybe some polls on what you want to listen to be read.
In Search of April Raintree, Chapter 10. I watched her plane taxi down the runway and gathered speed until its wheels no longer touched the ground. I watched until I could see it no more. Suddenly, I felt so empty, so alone. Funny, I should have felt that way when Bob was right there beside me. On the drive back home, he was as preoccupied with his thoughts as I was with mine, so he didn't say much. Sunday dinner that evening was eaten in silence, and not even Bob and his mother made any conversation. The atmosphere reinforced my feeling of loneliness. As usual, Bob and his mother retired to his office to plan the coming week's business strategy. I went upstairs to our room. I was restless and I didn't know why. I turned the television set on, but there was no programs that interested me. I left it on just for the voices. I looked at a book, then another. That was no good either. It wasn't the first time I had felt this way, but it was the worst. This bored restlessness, which usually came after being big parties or large gatherings. Maybe if I had something of my own to do, something which involved what? Useless. That's what I was. Bob had his business. Mother Radcliffe had her social calendar, plus the business. Sheila had her great cause. I had nothing. I had everything I ever wanted, yet I had nothing. Mother Radcliffe and, therefore, I were on different charitable organizations, but none of them grabbed my heart or loyalty. Bob and I had our group of friends, but I felt I had access to them only as long as Bob was with me. But I did find our own age group much more interesting than the older ladies with whom Mother Radcliffe surrounded herself, especially after Heather Langdon joined us. I wanted to fashion myself after her so much because she so enjoyed living. She lived by her own approval, not that of others, just like Cheryl. Cheryl and I wrote monthly letters to each other, but the chasm between us had grown wider, and there had less to say in our letters. The only thing she told me was that of great interest was her ongoing search for our parents, where I'd spend about a month of weekends and quit. Cheryl wouldn't quit. I worried. Then in May, I got a letter in which she indicated she had finally given up. I was relieved. I didn't know what she would have done if she had found our parents. I hadn't even wanted to think about that possibility. Now that she had ended her search, I no longer worried about how shocked and disillusioned she would have been. My conclusion about alcoholism was that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And if one's own children weren't enough reason for one to recover, then there could be no reason at all. Her letters started to arrive less and less often. She wrote about her education and her work at the Friendship Center. I found myself again in the position of envying her. She had a reason for being. She was her own person. I merely existed. Comfortable and surrounded by socially prominent people. But I felt that I really didn't belong. That feeling grew worse as the months went by. I didn't belong because I didn't care. Not the way the others did. I was quite content to let Mother Radcliffe and Bob run my social life. I performed all my duties as expected. That September, I picked out a very expensive IBM Selectric typewriter for Cheryl's birthday. That was something she could appreciate. I even thought it might be nice to go back to Winnipeg and spend some time with Cheryl. I tried phoning, but found that the service had been disconnected. I wrote Cheryl immediately, offering financial aid if she needed it. She wrote back that she was hardly ever home and told me that she had been invited to Brandon over the Christmas holidays. I felt as if she were abandoning me. Because I read between the lines that she didn't want me in Winnipeg. Christmas passed. New Year's 1971 came and I still couldn't shake my feeling blue. Actually, I don't know why they say blue when it's more like gray. The year of 1971 was to be a year of many changes for me. My feelings of inadequacy and boredom turned to resentment and jealousy. I came to hate how Heather and Bob could laugh so easily, and suspicion set in, and I began nagging Bob in private. Meaningful conversations between us had all but disappeared. I guess all he could see was my totally negative side, and he couldn't see my reasons for it. I couldn't have explained it to him at the time anyway, since I didn't quite know what was going on inside of me. Mother Radcliffe even showed an open disgust for me because on different occasions I had rebelled and refused to perform my social duties. But that was okay because I was just as disgusted with her and her snobbish friends and her card games and her charitable works, done only so that she could be identified as a philanthropist. All these people lived for one of two things: money or power. They were hypocrites, all of them. Charming to each other and they were face to face, but get them into separate rooms and their tongues could cut like knives. They were such superficial people. I became quite good at it, seeing all the negative sides and criticizing them to a high heaven to myself. It came to me that I had criticized the native people, and here I was doing the same thing to the white people. Maybe that's what being a half breed was all about, being a critic at large. I suppose things could have continued like that for a long time, but in August I overheard a conversation between Mother Radcliffe and Heather that roused me out of my positive state and got me fighting mad. Our bedroom had a closed-in balcony which overlooked a private garden. A few days earlier, Bob and I had a big fight. To make up for it, Bob had decided to take the day off work and take me out for the day. We had planned to start out right after breakfast. I was amused at Mother Radcliffe's obvious chagrin, but then Bob and I had another difference of opinion in our bedroom that morning, and he left in his car without me. I was so embarrassed that I hid myself in my room and planned to stay there until Bob got back. It was about noon when I heard a car drive up. I looked out and saw Heather walking up to the front door. I wondered what on earth she was doing here. I knew she and Mother Radcliffe didn't have that close of a friendship, and that I knew they didn't have that close a friendship that they would have lunch together. I went back to the balcony to return to my book, wondering all the time what was going on downstairs. I didn't have long to wait. They came out into the garden below, presumably to have their lunch there. Their voices drifted up to me, and I could hear everything they were saying clearly. Mother Radcliffe was saying, "I'd like to get straight to the point. Is this affair you're having with Bob serious, or are you just toying around with him?" An affair? With Bob? Serious? I couldn't believe I was hearing right. Not Heather. She was my friend. Bob was my husband. Of course it's serious. You know how we felt about each other when you broke us up, and don't deny it. I'm as naive as I used to be. No, it won't be long before Bob asks April for a divorce. Well, it doesn't appear it'll be all that soon when he starts taking time off work to spend with her, Mother Radcliffe responded. I heard Heather scoff at that and say, "Well, he's taken a lot more time off for me, I'm sure. But I can't help wonder how come, now that he's married. You approve of Bob and me? I know you purposely went out of your way to have me at your New Year's party. What do you have against April? She makes a nice, obedient wife. Why don't you want her for a daughter-in-law? Didn't you notice her sister? They're Indians, Heather. Well, not Indians, but half-breeds, which is almost the same thing. And they're not half-sisters. They have the same father and the same mother. That's the trouble with mixed races. You never know how they're going to turn out. And I would simply dread being a mother to a bunch of little half-breeds. The only reason I can think of why Bob married her after knowing what she was simply to get back at me. Well, I had my doubts as to how serious he was with you, because of days like today." Heather shrugged it off. "Don't worry. Bob's a husband with a guilty conscience. He'll realize the best thing for April is a divorce. Yes, I suppose you're right. Of course. He'll give her a nice, large settlement." You are so bloody right," I almost shouted. Perhaps they said more about me, I don't know. With my face burning hotly and my heart thumping like a war drum, I headed downstairs to confront them. They were both surprised and off balance when I stepped out onto the terrace to face them. I had always treated Heather with a certain amount of awe and respect, and I had also given Mother Radcliffe her due respect. But at that moment, I eyed them contemptuously, and they realized their secrets were out. "What are you doing here?" Mother Radcliffe asked. I was still breathing hard, ignoring her question. I said, "You two make me sick." I looked at Heather. You pretended friendship all this time, and I gave you my trust. Oh, sure, I suspected. I'm not blind, but I really thought it was only my imagination. Maybe I hoped it was my imagination. That Bob's mother would rather have a person like you, a hypocrite, an adulteress, as her daughter-in-law, rather than risk a few grandchildren who would have an Indian blood in them. Well, that's beyond my comprehension. Mother Radcliffe started to cut in, but I turned on her and cut her off. "And you make everyone that comes within your reach into puppets. But thank you very much for cutting my strings, and thank God I didn't become pregnant by your son. I wouldn't want the seed of your blood passed on to my children." With that, I turned my back on them in a deliberate gesture and walked out. A little while later, when I was up in my room, I heard Heather's car start up and she drove away. My heavy breathing returned to normal. My trembling rage subsided. I had to figure out what to do. Only one thing was certain. They were going to give me a large settlement, a very large settlement. Well, so I had seen through them, yet didn't even know it. All my criticisms were justified. My big fight with Bob had been about Heather. Turned out he was a liar too, just like my parents had been. Married me only to get back at his mother. Heather deceiving me with friendship while all the time she was only one Bob. Mother Radcliffe making me call her mother when she so detested what I was. And then there was Cheryl. She had told me how it would be, but I hadn't believed her. And although I had the same thoughts as Barbara Radcliffe about children, it was unforgivable for her to tell them to my rival. I did have a fear of producing brown-skinned babies. How could I give my loving to such children when I still felt self-conscious about Cheryl? Well, this wasn't the real issue. I had to plan a course of action. First thing I'd have to do would be to see a lawyer. I called Ronald Feldman, who I knew was a divorce lawyer from the conversations at parties. I phoned him and he said he couldn't see me for 2 weeks, but he suggested that if I were serious about getting a divorce on the grounds of adultery, that I should cease living with Bob. I thought that meant I had to move out immediately. Next, I phoned Bob at work. I wasn't surprised to find him there, nor that he sounded cold and distant with me. I demanded that he come home at once, as an urgent matter had come up. While I waited for him, I looked through the newspaper and phoned to inquire about different apartments for rent. The thought of living in a huge empty space was depressing. I didn't know anyone who would go out of their way to come and visit me. What I also needed was a job to keep me occupied. Still, I knew from past experience that evenings could be long and lonely. Maybe I would get so lonely I'd join the ranks of women who frequented single bars. I spotted a column under the heading of shared accommodations. That would be better than living alone. I phoned and was able to make some appointments for the following day. For now, I could stay in a hotel. I looked forward to a new life where I wouldn't be controlled by anyone else. I felt as if the sun were coming out from behind the clouds, and it was a wonderful relief that there was still a sun. "Oh, I know you didn't mean to, Mother Radcliffe, but you've made me a happy woman." When Bob finally came home, I must have sparkled with excitement because he said, "I thought something was wrong, the way you sounded on the phone, but you look like the cat that swallowed a mouse." "Well, Bob, I understand you're about to ask me for a divorce. I'll save you the trouble of having to ask." "Oh, not that crap about Heather again. Is that what this is all about? Well, sweetheart, if you like, I could call a meeting of all those involved. We are gathered here today to establish whether there is or there is not an affair going on between my loving husband, Bob, and my good friend, Heather. I was planning to be very bitter about it, but I've changed my mind. I'm going to be sarcastic." I smiled as I watched Bob sit down, and the look on his face acknowledged the affair. "How did you find out? Did Heather tell you?" "In a matter of speaking, yes, and your mother told me, and in a lot of different ways you told me too," I said. "I'd appreciate it if you took me to a hotel for now. I'll look for an apartment or something and then I'll send for my things. Don't even want to make any explanations to Mother before you leave. I'm sure your mother knows I'm leaving. I've packed a few things and I'd like to go now." In less than a week, I'd found a place to my liking. It wasn't far from the subway on Woodbine Avenue, so I had easy access to the downtown area where I planned to find a job. The rooms were in a large 3-story house, and the kitchen and dining room were shared by all the tenants. Most of the men and women who lived there were artistic types, and they provided me with long overdue companionship right from the first day I moved in. Once I was settled, I turned my thoughts to getting myself a job. Money wasn't a problem because Bob had given me more than I'd ever need, and that was just for 1 month. One of the other boarders, Sheila, suggested I do temporary work like she did. I signed up with her agency and was sent to different locations, filling in for absent secretaries. Mr. Feldman, my lawyer, told me in December that the court hearing was to be held on January 26th. He assured me that everything was going extremely well. We were both pleased with the settlement Bob had offered. I remembered the time I was starting at the Red River Community College and I had $800 in the bank. I had thought then that I was rich. Now I knew without a doubt that I was rich and independent. The same day when the mail came, I found that the letter I had sent to Cheryl in November had been returned. On it was marked moved, no forwarding address. That was funny. Why hadn't she written to me to let me know? Or she could have called. I'd given her my new number, my new address, and had told her about my new situation. She should have written or called. After all her thinly disguised refusals and excuses why she couldn't come or why I couldn't visit her, I began to feel like my own sister was giving me the cold shoulder. Did she think I was such a failure? On the other hand, I had always said she ought to go her own way, and I'd go mine. Maybe that's what was wrong. Since Cheryl didn't write to me about any Christmas plans, I spent it with those other boarders who also lacked families to go home to. On Christmas Day, we all went to this old folks' home where Sheila's grandmother was living. That's when I got my first understanding of how Cheryl must have felt when she made somebody's day a little brighter. On Saturday morning in early January, I received a phone call at 8 o'clock, thinking it was probably the agency looking for last-minute secretarial help. I was tempted to let it ring, but I wasn't the one who could ignore a ringing telephone. In a second, I was wide awake. It was a nurse calling from the Health Sciences Center in Winnipeg, asking if I were related to a Cheryl Raintree. Then she said that Cheryl had been brought in during the night. I immediately asked how serious it was, and the nurse said she was still unconscious, so they couldn't be positive. Serious or not, I felt I had to at least be by her side. That afternoon, I was on a flight back to Winnipeg.